Protection Command isn't the taxi service. So he misused police resources for his own ends.
There was no ceremony. There was no televised address. There was no press officer standing beneath a polished chandelier delivering the words the country had been waiting to hear. What happened instead was quieter, colder, and far more devastating than anything Britain had braced itself for. Behind a sealed door inside one of the older wings of Buckingham Palace, a single document was signed, stamped, and filed away. That document would change the fate of one of the most watched branches of the royal family, and it would do so without any of the usual royal ceremony that the public has come to expect in moments of national consequence. The signatures were fewer than 3, the silence that followed was longer than most speeches, and by the time the consequences of that decision reached the outside world, the country's relationship with 2 of its most famous royals would never be the same again. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss a single update. What unfolded was not a public confrontation, and it was not a televised argument. It was an administrative act, executed with the precision of statecraft and the coldness of institutional protection. A court order, in the royal sense, was not the same as a courtroom ruling. It was an internal directive issued through the sovereign's household, with the force of constitutional permission behind it, used rarely and almost always in moments when the monarchy itself needed to be shielded from reputational, ceremonial, or national risk. This order, when it was finally understood, drew a line not just around a country, but around a family, and the family it chose to distance was the one the tabloids, the broadcasters, and millions of ordinary viewers had believed for years was simply too complicated to ever fully remove. For months, much of the public conversation had assumed the question was coming back to Britain. Could Harry come home? Could Meghan return for public duty? Could the children, Archie and Lilibet, eventually meet their grandfather under ordinary, peaceful royal circumstances? Each time the speculation rose, courtiers carefully declined to comment, and that silence became its own kind of signal. But now, the silence had a name attached: Queen Camilla, in a decision that insiders described as her most forceful act since her elevation, had authorized an order that quietly but unmistakably closed the door. Within the palace itself, the first reaction did not come from the king. It came from Prince William. He was, according to those inside the family bubble, already in a meeting at Kensington Palace when an aide carried a sealed envelope across the long hallway. He read the document slowly. He did not speak for several minutes. Then he closed it, placed it inside his jacket, and finished the meeting as though nothing had changed. Catherine, seated nearby and reviewing a separate schedule of engagements, looked up briefly, saw what her husband was holding, and asked nothing. She already knew. Both of them understood what the envelope contained, and both of them understood exactly why it had been sent to them first. The truth, however, was far more painful than the act itself suggested. This was not a spontaneous decision made in anger, nor was it the result of a single evening's disagreement. The decision had been months, possibly years, in quiet formation. It was the product of a series of private conversations, internal reviews, and silent calculations, all of which had slowly convinced the king and his senior advisors that the safest course for the monarchy was to formally close a chapter that had remained open for far too long. The monarchy could survive many things, but it could not survive the constant, unresolved uncertainty of an exiled prince whose loyalty, motivations, and intentions remained unclear. So one night, in a room without cameras and without the press outside, the decision became paper. To understand why the order came to be, one has to step back and remember what had happened earlier. The story did not begin the day Camilla signed the document. It began, in truth, the moment Harry and Meghan stepped away from working royal life. Their departure, which became known simply as Megxit, had at first been treated as a private family matter. The palace, hoping to contain scandal through dignified restraint, issued a brief statement expressing love and support. That restraint cost the institution dearly. Negotiations, walkouts, Netflix deals, public interviews, and a lengthy prime-time tell-all interview reframed the family's image abroad. The brothers William and Harry, who had once walked together behind their mother's coffin as grieving teenagers, were no longer speaking with the same warmth. Their relationship, by every reliable royal biographer's account, had become formal, distant, and icy. The family had survived the loss of Diana. It had survived the marriages, the divorces, and the scandals. But this fracture felt different. It carried the weight of unresolved grief, and it sat unresolved across every public appearance the brothers were forced to share. Yet it was not a single interview or a single headline that led to the court order. It was a pattern, quiet but unmistakable, that had accumulated behind closed doors. Members of the royal household had begun meeting privately to assess whether the Sussexes' continued foreign presence constituted a national security concern. Constitutional advisors had reviewed the question of whether honorary military titles, including those Harry once held, could be quietly retired without offending the public. The Lord Chamberlain's office had examined official household procedures to see what authority existed to prevent a former working royal from attending state functions. Ceremonial precedence meant nothing if it could not be enforced. The role of the official household was, in such matters, to protect the dignity of the sovereign and the continuity of the institution. That work, in this case, had been ongoing for longer than the public ever knew. The trigger event, the moment that made action urgent, came late in the spring. Private correspondence between representatives of the Sussexes and elements of the British press suggested an intention to revisit certain claims on British soil, claims the king and his team considered already settled. Court filings, still under seal, referenced the possibility of further legal action and renewed public pressure. Sources within the household described the king's reaction as one of measured concern. He had not voiced anger. He had, however, expressed to a small number of trusted advisors that the monarchy could not continue to operate indefinitely under the strain of unresolved reprised accusations. The king was not a man who responded with emotion. He responded with processes, memoranda, legal reviews, and quiet conversations with people he trusted. It was during one of those conversations, late at an evening meeting at Clarence House, that Queen Camilla took the lead. According to insiders who later spoke of that evening, she did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She simply laid out, calmly and clearly, what the institution required and what could no longer be permitted. She spoke of duty. She spoke of protection. She spoke, with unusual precision, of the price the monarchy was paying for a door it could not close. The king listened. The advisors present said her words carried a weight that surprised even some of the most senior voices in the room. Camilla had spent years building her position in the family. She had endured public skepticism. She had weathered ridicule. She had earned a measure of trust through consistency, presence, and silence. On that evening, she used that trust to advocate for the most consequential administrative act of her tenure. The confrontation that followed the meeting did not happen in a televised studio. It happened in private, between the King and the Prince of Wales, in a sitting room that had hosted quieter conversations between monarchs and heirs for generations. William, by all accounts, did not object. He had long believed the chapter must end. He had warned, more than once, that the monarchy could not be drawn indefinitely into the emotional orbit of a brother who had chosen distance. Yet he also knew what such an order would feel like to his father, who still loved his younger son in the way only a father can love a child who has chosen a different life. The heir, sensing that his father might hesitate, did not push. He simply stated, plainly, that the family needed to act. The king, after several long minutes, nodded. What happened next required the quiet machinery of the British state. Constitutional lawyers reviewed the proposal. The Lord Chamberlain's office confirmed the scope. The official household, which operates under the sovereign's authority but with its own administrative depth, drafted the language of the order. State communications were prepared, though only a few were ever to be released. A state communication, in the institutional sense, was an official instruction designed to convey policy without inviting negotiation. In this case, it was designed to convey a boundary without requiring explanation. The document was short, it was unambiguous. It stated, in formal language, that the named individuals and their associates were not authorized to return to the United Kingdom for any official or symbolic royal purpose. Ceremonial, state, or public-facing activity connected to the monarchy was, in effect, foreclosed. The order did not strip citizenship. It did not physically prevent Harry or his family from setting foot on British soil in any private capacity. But by drawing the institution's line clearly, it denied them the rituals, protections, and public recognitions that had once defined their place in the royal family. In royal terms, this was not exile in the medieval sense. It was exclusion in the modern constitutional sense. The monarchy was choosing to deny future reunion, future ceremony, and future reconciliation through official channels. What remained between the brothers and their homeland was the bare, unresolved privacy of an ordinary family without any institutional weight. The king, by all accounts, did not take the decision lightly. He had, in earlier years, expressed private hope that his son and daughter-in-law might, with time, return to a closer relationship with the working family. That hope, however, had to be weighed against the cost of expectation itself. Every time the British public was led to believe a return was imminent, every time the press carried breathless reports of a coming reconciliation, the institution was exposed to the cycle of hope, disappointment, and public debate that distracted from the work of state. The monarchy could survive many things, but it could not survive the appearance of instability. So the king accepted what he had not necessarily wanted. He signed. Camilla countersigned. The document was filed. The public response did not come immediately. The palace, in keeping with long-standing practice, did not announce the order. It waited, because waiting was the silent weapon of the modern monarchy. It let others discover the information, let broadcasters and newspapers carry the news independently, and then issued a short, calm acknowledgement only when it could no longer be avoided. When the news finally broke, often phrased as a leak from within the institution itself, the nation's broadcasters carried it within minutes. Viewers watched as anchors tried to interpret what had happened. Commentators tried to explain, with varying degrees of accuracy, what the order meant in constitutional terms. Politicians, sensing the weight of the moment, declined to interfere. The monarchy, in Britain, was meant to operate above politics, and the political class instinctively understood this. They offered, instead, quiet acknowledgement. The country saw one thing. Inside the family, the truth was far more painful. For William, the order carried a strange kind of grief. He had grown up idolizing his mother. He had, in private moments, told those close to him that he believed Diana would have wanted her sons to stay together. He carried that belief like a private burden then, and he carried it as a private burden now. Yet he also believed the monarchy could not be hostage to that desire for the rest of his reign. Catherine, watching him from across the room after the morning he received the document, took his hand without comment. She did not need to speak. She understood what his silence meant, and she understood what role she was expected to play. In the days that followed, she appeared at public engagements with a slightly firmer bearing, occasionally glancing at her husband in a way that suggested quiet, shared resolve. The Princess of Wales had learned, long ago, that the monarchy did not always reward love with reciprocity. It rewarded duty with continuity, and continuity, in this family, was the highest form of love. Public debate, as expected, was intense. Some accused the palace of cruelty, others argued the order was overdue. Headlines spread across continents, and broadcasters interrupted regular programming to announce the development. Statements poured in from former palace staff, historians, constitutional commentators, and ordinary members of the public. Some argued that the Sussexes had been treated with unfair finality. Others said the institution had acted with dignity and pragmatism. There were moments of genuine national conversation in market squares and living rooms about what it meant to be royal in a modern age. The monarchy had done what it always tried to do in moments of institutional strain. It had chosen preparation over denial. It had chosen continuity over confusion, and it had done so while leaving the door, technically, slightly less open than before. The moment the nation would come to remember did not come from the broadcasters. It came from a private ceremony, later made partially public through controlled images. The king and queen consort were seen at a state event in the following days, walking slowly across the stone courtyard of the palace, greeted by dignitaries, watched by photographers, framed by centuries of architecture. Camilla was at Charles's side, not behind him, not beside him in a formal sense of secondary position, but at his arm. The gesture was small, yet it was deliberate. It signaled, to anyone who understood royal body language, that the queen consort had taken her position with full authority. The king appeared thinner than the year before, but he stood upright. He looked ahead. He did not once appear to waver. Camilla, however, allowed herself, once the formal ceremony was done, the briefest glance sideways at her husband. It was not a look of triumph. It was not a look of satisfaction. It was a look that those inside the family would later describe, quietly, as an act of shared burden. She had done what the institution needed. She had paid the political price to do it. And the king, in his own way, accepted the cost because he knew the price she would pay for leading the moment. For William, that quieter day held its own version of catharsis. In the days after the order was signed, he appeared at a charity event, greeting veterans, shaking hands with care, listening attentively to stories from people who had rebuilt their lives after serving. For those who understood his private loss, that image carried meaning. He was stepping into the future with the steady, sorrowful confidence of a man who understood that duty sometimes required the rejection of family in order to protect it. Catherine stood near him, equally graceful, equally composed, equally aware of the heavy silence underneath. There was no public conversation that day about the Sussexes. There was no comment, there was no private statement. The royal family, in its most refined form, simply carried on. That carrying on, in the end, was the point. The monarchy did not exist to win every argument. It did not exist to punish anyone who had chosen differently. It existed to endure. To endure required protecting the institution from being constantly drawn into private grievances. To endure required accepting that some relationships would remain unresolved. To endure required accepting that love and duty could no longer remain in the same form for this particular branch of the family. The final symbolic image of this moment, the one the public will remember longest, was not the signing itself. It was the quiet image a few days later. The king, Camilla, and William side by side, walking slowly to a waiting car. No smiles, no theatrics, only the steady, practiced stride of a family that had once again chosen the country's continuity over its own private wounds. The truth was more painful than any commentator could yet articulate. No one raised their voice, but no one inside the family pretended that the order had been easy. Harry had once been the boy who mourned his mother with his brother beside him. He had also been a soldier, a husband, and a father. He had been a prince beloved by many. Now, in the quiet records of the official household and the formal language of state communications, his place in the working royal family had been described, with administrative finality, as closed. That did not mean the door to his heart was closed to his family, nor did it mean his father's love had vanished. It meant the institution had decided. And the institution, in Britain, was not merely a family, it was the central pillar of national identity. If the family could not protect itself, it could not protect the nation. If the institution could not draw a line, the line would be drawn by history. What came next, of course, was known only to those who would live it. Harry might one day return to the country privately. He might one day meet his father not as a working royal, but as a son, away from cameras and away from the politics of the moment. He might, over years, rebuild some version of warmth with his brother. The palace had not blocked personal contact. It had only blocked official return. And yet, because every royal act carries symbolic weight beyond its administrative purpose, the message was unmistakable. The monarchy had chosen preparation over denial. It had chosen continuity over confusion. It had chosen the long, sobering protection of the crown over the short, painful comfort of a family reconciliation that the country had once wished for and would now have to release. He had expected concern. He had not expected finality. The king's signing of the order, in the days after its circulation, was said to have been slow. The king, by then, was a man who understood that his reign was not about holding on to every family member within his arms. It was about holding on to the institution itself. Camilla, who had long been underestimated, had shown in one quiet evening that she understood this even more clearly than the king himself. The monarchy could survive many things, but it could not survive endlessly unresolved expectations. So the door was closed. The order was filed. The country adjusted, mourned, debated, and carried on, and the royal family, wounded but united, walked forward into the next chapter of its long, complicated, deeply human story. Thanks for watching. Please do not forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.